is the upcoming schedule. So this week we have Caleb Musgrave on. I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. Next Monday, we have an amazing lady, Lee Earle from the Pine Project. Lee runs the Toronto Foragers Society. She teaches kids and adults through the Pine Project. She's a phenomenal naturalist, and she's also an internationally certified wildlife tracker. So we're going to have Lee Earle on next week. I'm super excited about that. She might even be on the call tonight. I'm curious. Maybe say hey in the chat if you're on tonight, Lee. What else do we have? After that, we have another really good friend of mine that I'm really excited to introduce. It is Christina Yu is her name. And she's actually going to be helping me run the Reading Nature's Forgotten Language course that a bunch of you have already signed up for. And most of you probably have at least heard about. So she's going to be the other mentor. And ironically, she actually works with Canadian Bushcraft as well. So in 2 weeks from now, Christina Yu is going to be coming on, and we're going to be doing a bit of an introduction to wildlife tracking. That one will be run more of an actual, kind of a bit more like a formal online class that night. So that'll be in 2 weeks from now. And the only other piece I want to mention, so we have a good friend of ours helping moderate the chat room tonight and just supporting from a tech side. Her name's Sherry Ann. Sherry Ann runs an amazing organization called Blue Jay Botanicals. She has a super cool Instagram feed. So if you like plants and herbal medicine, you're going to want to follow at Blue Jay Botanicals. Maybe Sherry Ann, throw that in the chat. And then I'll also ask everybody, if you see something posted in the chat from Sherry Ann, she is going to be like kind of capturing, like if myself or Caleb references a link tonight or mentions a resource, Sherry Ann's going to be doing her best to actually put those up in the chat. So if you see something posted from Sherry Ann there, then know that that's kind of coming from myself and Caleb as well. She's helping moderate. Check out at Blue Jay Botanicals on Instagram for a great feed. Okay, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome a good friend of mine, a fellow bush skills practitioner, a fellow nature lover, Caleb Musgrave, to the call. And we're going to start off in our usual tradition and do a bit of an activity just to kind of help us all shake off the dust and the busyness of the day, the stresses of the world, and just bring our minds and hearts together in a good way. And remember that we're natural beings in nature right now, even as we sit in front of this computer. So I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself, Caleb, and open us up with the gratitude. And then I'll actually do a bit more of a formal introduction of Caleb and his background after this. Come on, Caleb.
Anin bojo, kinen disnekaz bazanashin dolem, Mississauga nishinabe and dal pamra shkoriang and donjaba. Bojo wanana bojo. My name is Caleb Musgrave. I'm from Hiawatha First Nation. I'm Mississauga Anishinaabe, and we are a people that are often involved in ceremony. We're people that are often looked at as spiritual people, as Anishinaabe are. And in that whole time, a lot of people think of that as like, you're going to see us at powwows, you're going to see us at sweat lodge, you're going to see us at Gobshkanib and sweat sun dances and such. And that's part of ceremony. That's the more public eye of ceremony. But as Anishinaabe, we have this kind of phrase that is, the land is ceremony. Everything is ceremony. Everything we do, every action we take is ceremony. And so there's this idea that when they hear us at the ceremonies speaking and we're holding sema or tobacco in our hand, people will think that we're praying. Anishinaabe don't really pray. We are not prayerful people per se, because prayer, from a teaching of like Jake Swamp, Jake Thomas as well, Haudenosaunee elders, they'll say very similar things to us, and that is that we don't pray because prayer is asking for things. We aren't asking for things. We're giving thanks. We're being thankful for every single tier of life. And so when we're looking at that landscape around us, we begin at that micro level, the microbiology, and work all the way up to those macro life, that big trees, the big biology around us, all that big aspect. And so think about it from perspective tonight. When you're thinking of this gratitude moment, I want you to picture from when you're putting your feet on that ground in the morning, stepping onto that earth. You might be doing the whole kind of hippy dippy barefoot grounding thing that a lot of people talk about, and how it could be helpful, or it might be just kind of a naturopath or homeopathic concept. But there is some importance there of stepping onto that earth, and start from your feet and observe what you see at your feet, whether it be snow and ice, or if you're in a southern hemisphere or a warmer environment, you might see still the plants that are growing. You might see those insects that are doing their thing, and be thankful for them first. Be thankful for what they're doing first, because that's what creates all life on this planet. and then move yourself up to what you can see at knee level. The smaller plants, the snow drifts in my neighborhood, the small shrubs that we're seeing, the outside in front of my house, we have a patch of prickly wild rose, and that's at my knee level. And those prickly wild rose right now are carrying a medicine of vitamin C and a lot of other beneficial chemical compounds that are at knee level right now, those rose hips that I can go out and pick right now and make a tea or a syrup or anything I need from them right at this time. And then we'll look at waist level, what we're seeing all around us, whether it's the larger shrubs, the red osier dogwood or red willow, what we call there's a few different names for it, but Musgrave, which is talking about how it's that red shrub you see in the snow. It really stands out to us in our landscape, and how we can be thankful for the fact that it can give us medicine, it can give us basket material, spokes and the withies for making our baskets, but even our snares for catching rabbit for when we're really hungry in the wintertime. And all that is happening at that level. And as we get up to our waist, we can start to see even taller shrubs and maybe even some animals that are about waist high, mid to waist high. Those deer, those coyote, those fox. Just the other morning, I was walking up with my dog up behind my house towards the cemetery. Up behind my house is a hill, and there's a cemetery up there that I go to pick acorns at every fall. And we're walking up there. There was a red fox, and I really have an affinity for red fox. I really love, as a trapper, a lot of people think I want to trap them. I don't trap red fox. I refuse to trap red fox because they're just such a rare beauty in my landscape, because we're a very coyote heavy population here. And you'll notice when the coyote population goes up, the red fox population usually gets pretty low. So to see that fox is kind of a blessing in its own way. And so to see them, I'm thankful to see that fox. And the fact that my dog saw that fox and lost her mind over that fox. We use the acorns for making bread, as well as a lot of other foods. Somebody was, Crystal Kurtz was asking in the chat. And so as we keep going up, we get up finally to our chest and our shoulders, and we're seeing those other beings. Maybe we're seeing more bird activity up at this height, or we're seeing those larger trees, maybe those young buckthorns that a lot of people, even myself, can complain about, because buckthorn is a non-native invasive in my region, those purging buckthorns, not the sea buckthorn. And they can be problematic, but at the same time, they have a lot of uses and a lot of benefits to us. I use them for quite a lot of things. My favorite thing about using them is I can use that hardwood sapling to build structures around my home and around my camp or wherever I'm on the land without having to cut down native trees. So I can give the native trees a break, and I can use those non-native plants to do what I need to get done. And we're going to continue up to our eyes and our ears and what we can hear and what we can see up at this level. And as we finally get up, we can start to see those bigger trees. We can start to see that rolling hills and landscape. Where I live on Rice Lake, which is the Rice Lake Plains, this big valley lake in the middle of central Ontario, just on the southern edge of central Ontario, just south of Peterborough. And as I'm coming down that hill, I get to see that whole lake. Do you know how blessed I am to see a whole lake every single day that I take my dog for a walk? All that fresh water right there. And I can see all that water down there covered in ice right now. We finally have a foot of ice on that lake. It's been months I've been waiting to go ice fishing. And so I can go out on that lake now and cut holes in the ice and go and try and catch some fish to have for dinner and feed my grandmother who lives across the road, and an elder down the road of mine who he doesn't eat any meat except for fish. So I'll go out and catch walleye, we call oga, or I'll catch a tikamashing, which is the white fish, and I'll bring those to him to feed him and my grandmother and everybody else and myself, because I like to eat fish. And all that I can see at that level when I'm just bringing my head straight up and look straight forward. I can hear all the bird activity. I can hear all the bird chatter, the red squirrels losing their minds, all these animals happening around us. And finally look upwards and we can see the canopy of those trees. And maybe it's nighttime that we're doing this, and I can see those stars, or I can see the wispy clouds of wintertime. It's a beautiful thing to be able to have all that to be thankful for just by simply looking down and up. And so even on our hardest days, not to make this too personal, but 2 days ago, an elder in our community passed away from a very violent strain of cancer that he had been fighting since November. And I'm what's called a shkabe, was a firekeeper in my community. And for the last 2.5 days, I've been firekeeping, and it's exhaustive work. You tend that fire. That fire can't go for 4 days during our ceremonies. During this time for that elder who's passed, their spirit to move on to the next life. And it's really hard-hitting, painful thoughts that are happening during this time. It's a time of grief. And even in a moment like that, I can look at that ground and then look all the way up to that sky and see everything happening and be thankful for all those things, even in the darkest moments of my mind. Day or night, I can do that. And so that's how I give gratitude. That's how I prefer to show my gratitude, is see all those things. And there's these phrases that we'll say in our language, Nakana Gana. It's all of my relations, all those beings that we see from the bottom to the sky, from the ground to the sky, and even below the ground, those microbes, that mycology, everything that's happening down there, all the little worms and bugs and all that fun stuff, everything all the way up to those eagles and those hopefully soon crows. I'm really waiting for those big, and we'll be talking about that at some point, I'm sure, tonight, but those groups of crows that start to come back very soon, which is a good sign of something coming. All that I can be thankful for. And everybody can do that. Nakanagana, that all my relations, all those beings that we see. And beyond that, we have those words of miigwech. Probably a lot of people who have hung out around Anishinaabe people have heard the phrase miigwech. And a lot of people think it means thank you. But to say thank you is to say like you're giving me something that doesn't belong to me already. And nothing on this land belongs to me. That's not what it means. Thank you is not that. It is simply, when I say ni miigwech, like thank you from me, like what I'm thankful for, what I'm saying, miigwech, isn't really thank you. What it actually is saying is you have given me everything I need right now. And so that's a beautiful way for me to understand my language, is that I'm not necessarily being thankful in the way that a Western mind will be, but I'm simply acknowledging to somebody else that they've given me what I need at this moment. That's a really beautiful thought, without trying to get too overly sentimental or a little too hippy dippy about it. It's a beautiful way for me to think about that. And so I'm getting emotional. Sorry. It's been a very rough couple of days, but it's going to be better. We don't believe when someone passes, that's something we should truly be. We're sad for ourselves, not for them, because they've got promoted. That elder has now become a spirit. That's something really genuinely beautiful. So miigwech. All right.
Thanks so much there, Caleb. Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
It's so interesting, everything you brought, just putting that into context, because I'm sure a lot of people can relate. You know, I had just a crazy day and a crazy week. It feels like there's a lot of moving parts in life, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of curveballs coming our way. And I came into this call actually feeling a little bit hectic tonight, a little bit busy, you know, right up until the last minute. I was scrambling to get stuff together, and I feel so much more relaxed after you just walking us through and bringing us into our awareness. And, you know, a practice that I do throughout the day, actually, even when I'm super busy, and I've done it multiple times today, is just stepping outside my front door for like 30 seconds to a minute and taking a deep breath, hearing those chickadees, feeling those cold breezes. And it's amazing, you know, just remembering to do that throughout the day, how powerful of a routine that is to put things into perspective when times are challenging and times are uncertain, you know. I've really come to think of gratitude as a survival skill in and of itself, and maybe one of the most important survival skills that can really keep us going and putting things in perspective. You know, I used to think of gratitude as this kind of, you know, kind of hippy dippy kind of thing, and now I literally think of it as a survival tool that's incredibly practical. So I appreciate you bringing our minds and awareness to that tonight, Caleb. And yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your losses.
I kind of want to touch on that survival tool of gratitude.
Please.
You look at some of the greatest stories of survival in human history, and you'll see that certain people were having moments of gratitude, and they were thankful for just the littlest of things. Whether it was recently, my friend Ryan told me the story of Shackleton's endurance expedition, and how they went out with 29 men and had everything fall apart, every single step of the way fall apart, and Shackleton brought all 28 of his men back with him. They all survived after 2 years and a month out in the Antarctic trying to stay alive with next to nothing. And you note through there in the journals how Shackleton was thankful of just the littlest thing that would happen. The sharing, one man spilled, he had one ration of milk a day for everybody, and the one man lost his milk, and without anybody even talking, 3 of the men shared their glass with him. Like, that's gratitude. There's a lot of survival beauty in that. And there's always that phrase of survival is having a view of heaven from a seat in hell. And that's that moment of gratitude when you see those stars while you have your broken leg in the wilderness, or whatever you want to look at it as. It really is beautiful, and it's a really powerful tool. of your mindset, your positive mental attitude, and everything you want to look at it as. So always be grateful. Always have gratitude in your heart, people. If you learn anything tonight, learn that.
Hey, beautiful friend. So I'll maybe just go over our game plan for the night here. Now that we've kind of brought our minds together and we're feeling connected to the land and we've shaken off the dust of the day. So we've been starting this series off with doing an introduction to our guest, who we haven't even done a formal introduction. So I'm going to introduce Caleb in a moment here. And then we're going to give you some mystery questions. So that's the part I asked you to have your journal for. And these are basically kind of seasonal questions that to stretch our awareness of the seasons, to stretch our awareness of our surroundings, of the cycles out in nature, and to help us learn. So Caleb's picked a couple questions. I've picked a couple. We're going to share them, give you some time to think about them. And then we're going to actually break into small breakout groups and you'll have a chance to chat with them. Coming back from that, we're going to do some community announcements. And then the second half of the call, Caleb and I are really going to dive into this long-term perspective of what it means to live in right relation with the land and to observe those cycles over a longer period of time and how that relates to us in the day-to-day, in our resiliency, in our connection with the land, in our relations, and our ability to procure food as well. And we'll probably finish the call asking Caleb a little bit about, as a forager, as a hunter and trapper, as somebody that's really into gardening, what's he doing this time of year? And what could you folks learn to improve your food resilience? So that's our game plan for the night. The goal is to be approximately an hour and a half long. So that would be us finishing up around 8:30 Eastern Central Time. And I know we have people from all over the world, so that might not mean a whole lot to you. But anyways, hour and a half-ish is going to be our kind of timeline for tonight. So let me introduce Caleb here quickly. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll just introduce myself really quick because I know a number of you probably don't even know who I am. You're coming on. I know a lot of people do, so it's a little bit redundant. I won't spend a lot of time on that. But my name is Chris Gilmore, and I've spent the past 20 years working in, I guess you could call the profession of outdoor education. But in my early 20s, after spending a life, I was brought up in the suburbs, spent my early childhood playing in the outdoors. In my early 20s, I met some mentors, people like Caleb, people like Alexis Burnett, who we had on last week, who started to actually show me that I was moving through the woods like a tourist. And that there was all of this going on around me, literally a language to the natural world that was right in front of my eyes. And because no one had ever pointed it out to me, I just didn't even see it. I didn't even know it was there. And it was nothing short of life-changing and sent me on this 20-year journey that I'm on and going to be on for the rest of my life to really deepen my awareness and my knowledge and my ability to not be a tourist in the outdoors, but to really feel part of that living story, to know what the sounds are telling me, to know what the signs are telling me, to know that the weather is about to change without looking at my phone, to have intimate experiences with wild animals and to learn from them. So that's just kind of my journey in a nutshell. And I run an organization called Chris Outdoors, and I do mentoring around that. So if you have an organization, I do staff training for organizations in naturalist awareness. I run courses online and in person in learning these kind of ancient ways of relating to the natural world. And then I also wear another hat in emergency and disaster preparedness. So I do consulting around emergency and disasters for organizations as well. So there's my story in a nutshell. I won't spend any more time on that. Now, Caleb, on the other hand, I met Caleb, I want to say back around 2008-ish at a wilderness skills gathering. And I had heard about Caleb for years before I'd met him at that gathering. And I can still picture walking into the camp. So imagine there's like 300-400 people hanging out on this big multi-100 acre farm. And we're coming together and there's all these workshops going on teaching different wilderness skills. And myself and Caleb were both instructors at this gathering, both running workshops. Caleb built this beautiful camp. And when I walked into his camp, I was blown away by this phenomenal cooking apparatus. He had harvested all of these different tree limbs and he had built, I don't even know how to fully describe it, but he had this most phenomenal setup over top of his fire. And he had like all these different dishes cooking. And I was just like, all the stuff that he would harvest is either cast iron steel or implements that he had harvested from the land and made right there on site. We had all these hooks and pots hanging and levers, and it was just mind blowing. And I walked in, I was like, wow, yeah, this guy is somebody that I would like to become friends with. And something I can tell you about Caleb, because now we've been friends for quite a while, and we've both taught together, and we've also spent a bunch of time in the woods just as friends, tromping around, doing what we do. Caleb always has something in his hands. He's always working on a project. He's always crafting. And I find that really inspiring as well. I mean, he really is a wealth of knowledge, and he's been brought up in a really unique way in that he almost embodies two worlds in my mind. And I don't know if Caleb would put it this way, but he mentioned being of Anishinaabe ancestry and from Hiawatha First Nation. So on one side, he's been brought up with some of the traditional teachings of his culture and his peoples. But then he's also, for lack of better words, been a total geek and immersed in the world of kind of more modern bushcraft and survival. And he's had some absolutely phenomenal mentors, people that he's gotten really close to that are kind of like legends in the bushcraft world. People like Gino Ferry and I believe Morse Kachansky. I don't know if those names mean anything, but he's spent a significant amount of time with these people that are just masters in the bush as well, with a kind of a different set of skills. So he brings this really phenomenal hybrid of both worlds, and he's just such a wealth of knowledge. So it's a real pleasure to bring him on the call here tonight. I got a question for you, Caleb, but I wonder if you want to add anything, or if I got anything wrong there you want to correct before I kind of ask the first question. Oh, and I will also just say, Sherry Ann has been posting a few links in the chat there, and she posted some about Caleb. He also runs Canadian Bushcraft. I haven't said that yet. They have an amazing podcast, the Canadian Bushcraft podcast, where they cover all kinds of fascinating topics in a lot of depth. It's a free thing. And if you want to support Caleb's work in the world, he has a Patreon page too. I'm going to send that link out in the email. But Canadian Bushcraft is the organization that he runs and he teaches through. And of course, they have the podcast. Anything you want to add and or change that I said there, Caleb? And then I'll ask you your first question.
The only thing I would add is I've learned from a lot of different people just because I want to understand everything. I'm that kid that was always trying to figure out everything from the get-go. And I spent most of my time growing up with Gino. I spent only a little time with Morse, sadly, before he passed. I spent about, in total, I'd say about 3 weeks, and then a lot of phone calls, Morse was famous for being that instructor that would go until 4 a.m. talking. And he'll keep you on the phone for 4 or 5 hours. And you spend a couple hours talking with that guy, you could write a book in detail with citations on everything he talked about in that time, and it would be a bestseller, guaranteed, just because of the amount of information he carried. And so I try to emulate Morse and Gino. Not so much Gino anymore because he's mean. He could be a pretty scary guy. He's kind of like that military aspect of survival and the psychological aspects. And so I'm not as mean as him. I'm a lot nicer to people in the woods. And I still get looked at as like being a hard butt or a mean guy in the woods to a lot of my students, but I'm actually trying to be as nice as I can in comparison to Gino. But yeah, it's a fun kind of world to be in, and you can check us out on most social media except for Twitter, just because I don't have anything actually profound to say on Twitter, so I just keep it off. I just stay off there. Instagram, YouTube, our podcast. We just dropped our 50th episode this past yesterday. Nikki Satira, one of the people who are in this call, did a phenomenal breakdown of the life and times of the coyote with me, where we talked for almost 2 hours just about coyotes and their behavior, the eastern coyote compared to the western coyote, and all the crazy genetics that's going on there, and all the interbreeding and the natural history. It's just a cool episode in general. All of our episodes are pretty cool, though. We got 50 episodes talking about everything from harvesting wild foods and the understanding of the natural history of those wild foods, like acorns, wild rice, etc., all the way to psychological survival and preparing yourself for a better time in the outdoors. So please check that stuff out. It's all free. I don't think we have anything that you have to pay for except for Patreon if you want to just donate so we can afford this stuff. Like internet, and so that I can feed my dog so she doesn't decide to try and kill and eat me, because she's very vicious. But yeah, that's about all I got to say.
Awesome. Hey, Sherry Ann, can you just put up a link to the Canadian Bushcraft podcast and the Instagram account there? That would be...
I think she did already.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah,
Ryan Moffat, in my unbiased opinion, that's the best. Thanks, man. I appreciate
Ryan's
it.
my
That
co-host.
podcast you did a couple weeks ago, Ryan, that was phenomenal, by the way. Then I very much value your opinion. That's great. So, Caleb, let's actually go into the nature mysteries right now. So I'm going to invite everybody to get out a pen and a piece of paper right now. Write these questions down, give them some thought, and then we're going to split into breakout rooms and give you a chance to discuss them amongst the group. Now, Caleb and I have done our best to come up with questions that would be relevant across a good chunk of North America and seasonal, because we know people are coming through from multiple different habitats. With that said, the answers might be very different from one region to the next. So you're going to answer this for your habitat, your region. It's possible some of the questions might not apply to where you live, but we're doing our best to share things that are relevant over a large region. So maybe I'll start with my couple of questions, Caleb, and then I'll pass it over to you in a moment. I'll try and share slowly so that you folks can write them down, and then we'll do our breakout groups. So let's see, I had a few here. Which ones do I want to choose for tonight? So the first one I'm going to ask is, what is a constellation in your region? So this will apply anywhere in the world. What is a constellation in your region that you can only see during the winter months? So if you look up into the sky in the summer, you won't actually see these stars. What's a constellation in your region? It's really fun. The one I'm thinking of, I've been tracking it every night. I pop out and I look at where it is at different times, and then I'm tracking how that's changing over the seasons, and I'm writing about it in my nature journal every day. So what constellation you only see in the winter in your part of the world? The next one I'm going to ask is, what are 3 different ways you can tell, what are 3 different ways you can tell the difference between a raven and a crow? And I think ravens and crows can probably be found across the regions of a lot of people there. And a lot of people just go right to, well, a raven's bigger. But if the raven or crow is way off in the distance and it's flying, can you still tell them apart? So what are 3 different ways to tell apart a raven and a crow? And then the third question I'm going to ask is, where do beavers get their food from in the winter if the ice is over frozen? So beavers stay active all winter long. They're actually a really common food source of wolves up at where I live. They're active year round. Where does their food come from, and what are they eating in the winter when the ice is frozen over? And for some of you folks maybe that are in the south and you don't have ice, you could just ask, well, what are the beavers eating this time of year where you live? So those are my 3 questions. Caleb, you got maybe 2 more for us to give to the group?
Those are really good questions, and I'm already like wanting to scream my answers, but I'm going to hold off until we get into the breakout. My 2 questions. The first one is, what physical changes are mammals or birds in your area currently going through? Because they're constantly in a state of flux. Don't think that it's just like the big shifts that happen. What physical changes are mammals or birds in your area that you can easily observe, or you watch really carefully, are they going through? It could be mammals. You could pick one specific mammal. What ones are you noticing right now? It could be birds as well. What are they possibly going through? That could be physical changes in location. That could be physical changes in physical appearance. That could be physical changes in their diet. What are they doing right now that is changing? And the second question is, are you able to observe, what correlating signs or relationships are you able to observe between the animal activities and the trees around you? And that can be a really vague question. But if you think about it, it's really interesting to start looking at. You could look at it from a tracking perspective. You could look at it as an interrelationship, symbiotic relationship, whatever it may be. What correlating signs or relationships, and it could be simply correlation does not mean causation. One thing could be happening at the exact same time something else happens, and you use that as a way to gauge certain things happening year round, as a calendar, as a point in your calendar. What one animal might be doing or one creature doing, whether it's migration, diet change, whatever it may be, compared to the trees in that area.
Great. Okay, so we have 5 questions there. I'm going to, I'm not sure that we have time to put the questions in the chat. how about I read them again really, really quick and succinct, just so everyone's got them, and then we'll go in there. So question number 1 was, what constellations in your area do you only see in the winter months? What do beavers, or where do beavers get their food from in the winter? And particularly where I am, when they're under the ice. But if you don't have frozen over lakes, then what are the beavers eating right now? And 3 different ways you can tell the difference between a raven and a crow. And at least one of them that you can use to tell from a far distance away. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Jesse. Just threw in there the questions. And then Caleb's 2 questions, just to summarize. What physical changes are mammals or birds going through right now in your region? And the last one, what correlations are there between animal activity and the trees? So what what relationships are you seeing between the animals and the trees specific to this time of year? So how this is going to work, I'm going to split us all into breakout groups. There'll probably be 6-ish people per group. So in a moment, you'll see something pop up on your screen and you're going to have to accept it. And then you're going to jump into a breakout room. Once you're in there, you'll be able to unmute yourself and actually discuss this with the other participants. So that would be, and we'll do that for about 10 minutes. Then we'll bring everybody back in and we'll chat about some of the answers and dive into the kind of the second part of the call with Caleb. If you don't want to participate, then you can take a 10-minute break right now and walk away, but I highly suggest participating. The feedback from the breakout rooms has been really fun so far. So watch for something popping up in your room in just a moment here. Let's see. That should do it. Oh, I'm going to say one other thing really quickly here. And I'm just going to put out an invitation in the breakout room for 2 things. Number one, can you just be aware of the amount of space you're taking up? There's going to be between 5 and 6 people likely in your room and not a ton of time. So make sure that you're not just speaking the whole time. If you're somebody that gets excited and likes to talk a lot, just make sure you're allowing space for other folks. And then number 2, I just want to make sure that this is a safe space for anybody that's coming in. So we have people of all different experience levels here. And let's just use our best words and be super respectful of just everyone that comes in is allowed to be here. Everyone is welcome to be here. It doesn't matter whether you're a complete beginner or whether you're very knowledgeable. You're welcome to be here. And I just want you to feel comfortable being in this room regardless. So I'll just share those couple of pieces. And it's going to be about 10 minutes in the breakout group. So I'm going to hit create right now. Watch for the pop-up on your screen. And we'll see you all back here in 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to hit record again here, folks. So we're going to take up the questions really quickly. Just know there is a short break coming up. We'll probably take 5 minutes. Just let people have a quick stretch, and then we'll come back together for part 2. We still got so much to cover. Oh my goodness. We might end up going a little bit over tonight, so I'll just give you a little bit of a warning around that right now. Caleb, let's take these questions up really quick. So not a lot of detail for them. Just to make sure, I really want to make sure we allow enough time for part 2 of the calls. So as we said, you're going to have different answers in different areas for these questions. For myself, so a constellation that I can track in the summertime that I don't track in the winter was Orion's Belt. Those 3 stars that are all in a straight row. And if I look out my window right now to the south, they show up in the southeast right at sunset, and at sunset, and then it moves counterclockwise over the course of the night. And I've been going out every night and actually making some notes and seeing how every single night it changes just a little bit where it comes up. And it's been fun kind of tracking the time and tracking that over the course of the year. So Orion's Belt was my answer for that one. Yours might be a little bit different. Where are the beavers getting their food from? So beavers up where I live create caches of food under the ice. So they'll actually in the fall time make these massive piles of their favorite food. And it's often things like alder and poplar they really like there. There's a few different species that they prefer over others, but they'll basically go and cut these small saplings. They'll pull them into the water. And a lot of people think when they're looking at trees that have been cut down, big wide trees, they're thinking that the beavers are dropping them for food, but often they're not actually eating the tree. They're not eating the wood. They're eating the cambium, which is that living layer of bark on the outside of the tree. So often when they're dropping those bigger trees, it's not actually a feeding sign. There's often other purposes. It's dam building, it's home building, it's access, it's all kinds of different reasons. When they're making their food caches, they're usually only cutting stuff that's kind of like a, yay big okay sign to maybe tennis ball size in diameter. So they're cutting smaller saplings and then they make a massive pile under the water that they're able to access right through the whole winter down there. So that at least that's what they're doing in my area. No, and they're not stored inside the lodge, because that would be, or Jocelyn, that's way too much food. They make a massive pile. The food pile is bigger than the lodge itself. So they actually have a food cache outside of the lodge, and there's usually a clear runway to underneath the water between their actual lodge and where their food's stored. And then my third question, differences between a raven and a crow. So a raven significantly bigger is one. Another one is if you look around the necks, I tend to see a lot more kind of roughed up plumage around their necks, a way thicker neck, and it's a lot rougher looking. And from a distance, if you don't know this is the one I always use when they're flying. So if you look at the back of the tail, so imagine the very back, a crow tail is actually a triangle. So it goes out. If you imagine the crow is towards the bottom and its tail sticking out, it's actually flat across the top. Whereas a raven, it's actually rounded across the top. So the raven has the round tail, and the crow has a flat tail. So now even from a far distance, you can take a look at the tail shape and really quickly tell raven from crow. So I'll pass it over to you, Caleb. Why don't you share yours relatively quickly, and then we'll kind of shift gears into part 2 of the night.
I got the camera to work finally. Okay. So on ravens, also with the tail, sometimes you'll see that they're clipped instead of perfectly flat or perfectly round. They're sometimes kind of geometric. The one that I always notice with ravens is they're really acrobatic when they fly compared to a crow. Crows just want to go from point A to point B. Ravens want to make sure that they look really flashy while they do it. The easiest way to remember the whole ravens have that ruff around their neck, because I always say ragged raven, because they look really ragged compared to a crow. They're really clean lined. For me, what physical changes are mammals or birds in my area going through? We finally got down to -26 and -30 this past week for the first time all winter. And red squirrels will disappear when it hits -30 Celsius. So if it's -30 Celsius, you will not see a pine squirrel anywhere in the woods, because what they do, as soon as it gets to that exact temperature, they burrow down into their caches, into their middens of food. And they use almost like a debris hut to stay warm. And they come back out when it gets warmer again. And there's actually another physical change that's happening with mammals that kind of correlates with my other question. That's what correlating signs and relationships are you able to observe between animal activities and the trees around you? And that changed the diet of the porcupines. Right now, the porcupines, if you go into the woods, you can track the porcupines by their trail, but you can also track them from the trees because they're dropping hemlock needle twigs onto the ground, because they're going up and they're clipping those branches and eating the cambium that has a bunch of chemicals in it that can balance out their insulin levels. And they're going to drop whatever they don't eat to the ground. And the reason they're doing that right now is for the next few weeks, they're preparing their body to eat a very sugar-heavy diet when the maple trees start running their sap. And so they got to balance that insulin level ahead of time. So they're eating a lot of hemlock right now, and even some pine, but mostly hemlock in my area. And so that's the one observation I've been noticing between the relationships of the trees and the mammals.
Awesome. Thanks, Caleb. That's great. I'm sure some of you folks came up with other answers. I mean, Caleb's 2 questions, there's all kinds of different answers there that we could dive into. So there's just a few things to kind of get the gears moving in your brain there. And, maybe for folks that didn't know anything about some of those questions or had something spark, maybe that's your homework challenge for this week, to go out and do a little bit more research, to get out in nature, see what you can observe, maybe go try and track a porcupine and figure out where they live closest to you. So there's kind of a fun nature challenge for you. We're going to take a moment right now to share a few upcoming opportunities that might be of interest to you folks. So I'm going to go through those right now. So a couple of things I'd like to mention. One right off the bat. So if this is a free series, we really, really enjoy doing it. But if you have been getting a lot from it and you would like to support this work, one thing you can do is actually just share the series and let other people know about it. We'd greatly appreciate your support with that. You can also go and check out the online store that my wife and I have, where we sell ethically wild forage food and drink products. And I mentioned one of the things I'm drinking tonight is our elderberry syrup, wild Muskoka elderberry syrup. There's a ton of amazing research out there about the health benefits of elderberry, particularly during the cold and flu season. So you might want to go check out elderberry syrup. I've got it in a glass here with some ice cubes in it and some tonic water. It's a lovely drink, although I often take it straight. I often swig it while I'm talking too, because just to coat my voice. So if you go check out wildmuskoka.com and you enter LWS 10, so LWS, like living with the seasons 10, you get 10% off any order from the Wild Muskoka Botanical Store. The second opportunity I want to mention that's coming up is we're starting a cohort come middle of February called Reading Nature's Forgotten Language. Reading Nature's Forgotten Language. And this is going to be we're calling it the online course that gets you outside. And I don't even like to think about it as a course. This is more of an experience and a journey. where you have some mentors and you have some community to help you greatly expand your knowledge and your awareness when it comes to the land. All these kinds of topics that I've been chatting about Caleb tonight, that we chatted about with Lee and Laura, our past guests coming on with Starhawk and Charles the first week. This course is, the essence of it is basically learning how to interpret the tracks, the signs, and the sounds of the natural world, and to do it in a way that it really impacts and enhances the way that we move through the natural world. So as I said, it's more of an experience than just a course, and a journey that we take you on of discovery of the natural world, which of course leads to self-discovery. So I'm going to play a really short clip from the course right now, just to give you an idea of like the kind of stuff that you might see in the video inside the course.
Trail here, and right here by my finger, there's a little mark that just looks a little bit different than everything else on the landscape right now. When I think about who could this possibly be, there's only one animal around here that has hooves, and it happens to be the springtime. So this is actually a baby. I'm just gonna slip in really quickly, give you a quick little peek at her, and then I'm gonna slip back out. So she's right behind me. See how amazing her camo is? My thumb's literally pointing to her right now. I'll take a quick clip at the camera, but I really want to get out of here because I don't want to bother her. But wow, what an amazing gift today.
So that's a little sneak peek tidbit in the types of videos that you come in there. So the course has a whole bunch of pre-recorded video that you watch at your own pace, where we basically teach tracking and awareness concepts. And then we also have live, what we call virtual campfires, where we get together as a community, kind of like this, but it'll be a smaller group. And it'll be really focused around interpreting signs. We'll do a lot more question and answer. There'll be a lot more interactive component to it than these calls. So that's Reading Nature's Forgotten Language is the course. And if you are interested in joining us with the next cohort, we already have actually quite a few people from this series that have joined us. You can enter the coupon code TRACKS and get 20% off. So tracks at readingnaturesforgottenlanguage.com. And maybe I'm just going to mention one thing about the that video right there. That was actually a really neat story, thinking about tracking from a stewardship perspective. So yeah, Caleb, they're chatting there. That baby deer was resting and hiding, waiting for their mama to come back and feed them. So what had actually happened, and this is really neat to think about it from a stewardship perspective, we were actually running a course out in the forest that day. And we had about 30 students, and we were all practicing bushcraft and survival skills in that patch of woods. And if I wasn't a tracker paying attention to the ground, I might not have never noticed that. Or maybe I would have taken a quick glimpse and said, oh, cool, look, there's a small deer track, and not thought much about it. But because of my background and experience as a tracker, I saw it walking down the trail, and I thought, oh, there's a fawn. I'm going to get down and investigate a little bit quicker. And I looked at it and I had the thought, I think this track was just made, like as in like made within the last hour or so, which tells me that this fawn is really close. And what that also tells me is that if there's a possibility that we've spooked the mum off coming in as a group. So I was actually able to trail that fawn right from the trail and find it there. I took the clip really quick, but what it allowed me to do, generally, I don't want to track. I would never advocate for trailing deer fawns in the spring. It's too much pressure to put on them. You scare away the mom. They don't have protection. It's not good stewardship to go doing what I did if it was out of context of why I did it. And the reason I did it, I wanted to know, was that fawn close to us right now, and had her mom abandoned it? I verified that quite quickly. And then we were basically able to pull in all of our groups off the land and say, hey, we're actually going to move right now. And we're going to go and set up in a different area so that we don't put pressure on this fawn, and then mama can come back in on it. So if we hadn't done that, we probably would have just hung out in that same area all day long. And who knows the impact that it would have had on it. So becoming a better tracker also can impact, well, one, to notice and have amazing experiences like that to begin with. And then number two, it gives us the opportunity to be better stewards of the land as we understand how we relate to the other beings. And those are kind of some of the themes that we dive into with the Reading Nature's Forgotten Language there. Now, I know Caleb has a bunch of upcoming opportunities as well, but I'm going to wait till the end of the call to let Caleb speak about those. So let's take a 5-minute break right now. It's 8:03 by my time, so we're going to meet back at 8:07. And we're going to go into part 2 where we talk about those long-term seasonal living perspective, as well as food security. And Caleb's going to be sharing kind of from his perspective on those two topics. So we'll meet back in 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. All right, folks. Hopefully people are settling back in. Hopefully you got up and had a stretch. I often try and remind people to go outside and take a breath of fresh air during that break. Remind themselves and just tap in there. So I'll just answer a quick question in the chat here, and then I'm going to bring Caleb back on. Caleb, as soon as I see your video, I'll know that you're ready there if you're able to turn it on again. So quick question there. Someone had asked, just scrolling back up. I think they were asking about the Reading Nature's Forgotten Language course, if there is a hands-on component. So the way that it's set up, it has all these pre-recorded lessons where it's basically me out in the field kind of teaching all these different concepts, everything from reading the signs to knowing what the birds are saying, to how to move and be invisible to actually see wildlife. And then we do the virtual campfires is kind of the community aspect where we actually all meet like this. And then you can ask questions, you can post pictures. And then we also have an online community where you can be posting pictures and getting feedback as well. So there's not an in-person component right now because of all the restrictions around COVID. But our hope is to maybe eventually start running live classes again. For now, I can tell you that it's a very intimate experience. We get to know each other well, and the learning is quite deep. So if you'd like to join us, I'd love to have you on that journey of reading Nature's Forgotten Language. But without further ado, let's bring Caleb back on for part 2 of our call. And we're going to do this kind of interview style. I've got a bunch of questions that I'd like to mention to him. I'm going to do one more announcement here just from the chat there. Mickey Bry, who's been a regular part of this series right from the start. Anyone that's from Ontario, from the Peel Halton region, he runs is part of a group that runs a great organization called the Peel Halton Nature Collaborative. They have a Facebook page, and Mickey's got his email posted down there as well. So if you're from the Halton Peel area and you want to connect with other people in person and get outdoors, then you might want to check out the Nature Collaborative. All right, Caleb. Man, we got 20 minutes left. I already know we're going to go a little bit over, although let's try not to go too far over. And there's so much we're going to want to get in here. But where I'd like to kind of start out to bring us back to some of the things that you shared right during the opening conversation. Mm-hmm. Something that you said to me years ago that really, really stands out to me. And I'm thinking about this in context to this long-term living strategy on the land. You had mentioned to me that how one of your elders had told you once that, you're going off and training in bush skills and training with all of these people. And they said, why don't you learn to speak your language? Why don't you learn to speak Anishinaabemowin? And if you learn to speak Anishinaabemowin, how to live on the land is in there and in right relations. And when we were chatting before the call tonight, you had kind of made this comment, about how people always ask you like, well, when's the best time? If you were going to be dropped off into the woods, like dropped off by airplane and survive, what time of year is the best time to be dropped off? And you made this comment that I thought was brilliant. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter what season you get dropped off or what time, because you're always missing what came before. And this Anishinaabe perspective or longer term perspective on the land is the idea that there's like this cumulative story that's happening and we have a relationship with it. And that helps guide how we live in good relations with it. But coming back to that language question there, do you want to just kind of speak to what you meant or what that elder maybe meant and what you've come to think of that, the answer to that?
That was Vern Root from Saugeen. I grew up over on the Bruce Peninsula, and as a youth, I was spending a crap ton of time and money on survival courses with people like Gino and a lot of other people, but just like gear and like all this time trying to rub sticks together to make fire and try to figure out which ones are going to work, like what sticks from what tree will make this actually happen. Because I spent like 5 years trying to get a damn coal and it just wouldn't work. And so I was constantly screwing around with all these different things, trying to figure it all out. And Vern was watching me during all this. And he goes, if you just learned your language, you would know how to survive in the bush and not to do all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, okay. I know that you run a free language class on the res every Saturday. I get it, Vern. You're trying to get me to come in and take your class. I get it. And when I was 22 years old, I started hanging out with language speakers in the bush while we were out there, because a lot of our people know how to live on the land still. A lot of people make it sound like we're this vanishing race concept, but our culture's been revitalizing for decades. Our land skills have never gone away. They're just becoming more public again. And while I'm out there, they'd be like, yeah, this is Gog Mij, the hemlock tree. And this is like where you find porcupines. And at this time of year, this is when we live on porcupine. And the tree's name means like the porcupine tree. Like it's the tree you find the porcupines in. And I was like, wait, hold up, what? Like, yeah, this is where you find porcupines. I'm like, yeah, I know that, but like the name means this is where you find porcupines. Like, yeah, okay. And then we go down the road and they see like a basswood and they say, this is wigop or witigop. And that means like the tree that we get rope from. I'm like, right, cordage comes from basswood bark. Wait, so we have this in the language already? And it's like 6 years later and I'm just realizing what Vern was talking about. I'm like, I'm a freaking idiot. So that's part of like our landscape has always been our school. It's always been our school. The bush, regardless of what style of bush it is, whether it's conifer forests, boreal hardwood mixed wood, or it's like boreal, like shield habitat, whatever it may be, our language and our landscape are where we learn. And so starting to actually like in a sense decolonize my own brain and start to pay attention to more of our traditional knowledge, I started to realize a lot of things. Like you watch Survivor Man. A lot of us have watched the show Survivor Man. Les Stroud's a great guy, nice guy, salt of the earth. I like hanging out with him. I've only hung out with him a couple of times, and it's not been like we're really formal friends or anything like that. It's just I've got to meet him. He's nice. But you'll notice on a lot of his shows, like he gets dropped off in the Pacific Northwest, and he'll say something out of the line where he says something like, I was talking to the locals before I came out here and they told me if I was here a week ago, I could have got salmon. And like the next episode, he's in Wabakimi in Northern Ontario. And he's like, if I was here just a week ago, I would have had blueberries. It was a continual thing. It's like, there's no good time to get dropped off in the middle of nowhere and go surviving because you're always playing catch up, trying to get those things that were here before. And it comes up like a lot of my students have asked me over the years, like, when's the perfect time to start surviving on the land? Is it the springtime? I'm like, well, that's like easier in a sense because everything that's going to be food wise is now coming out for you. But now you can't walk across the lakes and the marshes to get to those other resources easily. You're going to be dealing with biting insects. You're going to be dealing with all these other compounding issues that you couldn't deal with if you didn't have that chance ahead of time to get out there and get those things and have those things available. Like birch bark, if you try to build a lodge and you're building it in August, bye, you're not going to survive for long. You're not going to get that wigwam because you don't have that bark that can peel easily. Birch can still peel in August, but that's just one tree. We make our lodges usually out of cedar bark in this area because it's such an easy bark to peel in an available tree, but it is only peelable for like 3 weeks of the year. And so you're always playing this catch-up game. The only way to really start living on the land is just bite the bullet and get out there and start suffering until you catch up the next year and start collecting those resources. It's a year-round thing. There is no beginning. We don't really have, in Anishinaabeg culture, we don't really have a New Year's. A lot of people think like, I've heard people say like springtime is the New Year's for the Anishinaabeg. Not really. Not like we don't have like a big celebration for it. It's not like we go shoot a bunch of fireworks in the air and count down to springtime or anything like that. It's we acknowledge that that's when life begins again in the forests, but that's it. It doesn't mean that life stopped before then. Like we weren't alive before that moment. It's just that's when things start to grow again. Is the iguan that early spring when the sap runs. So trying to learn how to live on the land in a holistic manner, in a long-term scenario, more than just surviving, but thriving and living, you have to be out there 24/7. I spend this year even more time, but like in an average year, I spend 200 days on the land. I'm 200 days on the land, harvesting acorns, harvesting wild rice, growing our crops. We grow, a lot of people think it was just the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois nations that grew crops in Canada, but Anishinaabeg have like 13 different strains of squash. We have 10 different strains of corn across Michigan, Wisconsin to Ontario. There's all these different foods that we're constantly having to grow and tend to and do all this work that we do on the land. That it's not just you start off in the spring and you're good to go. You got to start all year round and be out there and be available to the land to teach you. And that's how I've been able to pick up these little like nuances over time of watching the porcupines and watching the crows and watching all these different bugs and all that stuff. When the black flies start biting, what do we hear all the time from a lot of naturalists? What do you know happens when the black flies start biting, Chris?
That's often when we start getting the spring ephemerals coming out.
Yep. And so we're seeing all these things connecting. There's also the teachings that when the blueberries start blooming is when the black flies are biting. And when the black flies are less aggressive is when the blueberries are now fruiting and getting ready to go and be available to be picked and harvested.
Another one there actually I've noticed is that the fish bite, you know, if you're a trout fisherman, one of the things I love doing is fishing for brook trouts and rainbows in the springtime. And it seems like once the bugs come out, the bite actually picks up as well. And I think it's because of the hatching of insects. So now there's this natural food source on the top of the waterway, and that the trout get active with this. But if you're fishing a couple of weeks before the bugs come out, they're a little bit weary of what you're throwing into the water there. So that's been another one for me as a trout fisher, thinking about that. Hey, Caleb, that seems like a great kind of segue there, or brings up my next question. So being that you are a wild forager, you're a gardener, you're a hunter, you're a trapper, thinking about seasonal living, what are you doing right now? What are you focused in the winter months for all of those skill sets? And a lot of people think about gardening as a summer thing, but I'm one of the things I'm trying to bring across in this series is if you want to do it with any degree of self-sufficiency and self-reliance, it's actually a year-round task being a farmer and a gardener as well. So what are you doing around the topics of food this time of year?
The first one is seed saving. We brought in all of our crops back in the fall, and we started to pick away at them and dehydrate the crops. Whether it's the squash we grow, Gedea and Lenny Lenape white squash. We also have this variety that I call ditch squash, which is like a hybrid acorn squash that grows in my ditch, hence the name. And we eat all that. We're making like squash soup and Three Sisters soup and all those kinds of soups and roasted squash. And we're collecting those seeds. And now we're going through those seeds that we've let dry, and we're picking the ones that we want to have grow next year to get the best results, because we've given them all that time to air dry through the winter. And now we're getting them organized. Like those ones we can cook and eat as squash seed, like roasted squash seed or puffed squash seed. These are the ones we're going to grow, and we're going to put those in a specific container. And we may even not cook them, but soak them for a few days in mayapple root water, which has cyanide in it. And that's what we traditionally did, is we would soak our seeds that we're going to save for the growing season in deadly poisons. So that first off, you don't eat it. Like even if in the dead of winter, you're starving to death, your people are going through famine and Bacchadae Geesis in February, which we're now in. This is Bacchadae Geesis in some parts of the Anishinaabe culture. This time of year is called Bacchadae Geesis, the hunger moon. And even then, you don't touch those seeds because they've been treated in cyanide, in hydrocyanide from the mayapple root. And that saves your life later. Because if you don't have those seeds come spring, you die. You have to grow those foods. And so beyond that, there's the aspect of why we treat them in that poison is to keep the varmints out of it, to keep the mice out of it, to keep the chipmunks and voles and other critters that creep into your house through those little tiny seams in the wall. They get in and eat that stuff on you, and they start and they die immediately, and that protects our food for later. Some people talk about using like Labrador tea leaves soaked in there or left amongst their seeds. I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. The mayapple root infusion works. So seed saving is the first thing we're doing. The second thing is I'm trapping. I've just begun this week to prepare for under the ice trapping of beaver and going into the push-ups of the muskrat dens and set my traps to get their meat. Beaver meat is life for Anishinaabe. We love the beaver meat. It's high in fat, high in protein, very little bioaccumulated compounds, so there's very little risk of dangers of eating them. Whereas something like fisher or marten or otter, they have very high vitamin A content, can lead to hypervitaminosis, which is a dangerous and even deadly syndrome. And beyond that, it's just we know that they're good food, and we have them. We have plentiful of them around us now. They're very plentiful. Actually, beaver numbers now are almost identical to pre-contact numbers from the archaeological record and the paleontological record. We've done a very good job of taking care of our beaver in the last 70 years. Beyond that, I'm preparing for the next stage. So just to my right, I don't want to turn the camera because my place looks like a tornado went through it. I have poplar blocks of wood that I've been carving away and making into sugar troughs, because in another 3 weeks, I'm going to start transitioning from trapping and trying to get all my seeds ready and everything else to sugaring. We're going into the sugar bush now. And the sugar bush is probably the most like large volume harvest, it's the very first large volume harvest of the year of food. Anishinaabe, we know traditionally would have 200 pounds of maple sugar per person per household harvested by the end of the season. 200 pounds per person per household. That's a lot of sugar. Because if you think about it, we all know like the number of like 40-to-1 ratio of sap to syrup, 40-to-1 ratio. It's even higher. It's like a 90-to-1 ratio of sap to sugar. And traditionally, that was what we had, was blocks of maple sugar or granulated maple sugar. Because you didn't have glass bottles. This is not a glass bottle. This is a soda stream bottle, but bottles to carry all your syrup in. And it's very unpragmatic to carry a bunch of liquid and fragile containers from one camp to the next. So we would take our maple and our sap and we would boil it down all the way to a dehydrated block of sugar. And that was our main sweetener. It was one of our main food sources. And while we sugared, a lot of the men who were out in the sugar bush traditionally, that was all they lived on for 4 weeks of the year, up to 6 weeks of the year, was just that maple sugar. And beginning before that, they would have some porcupine. We would catch the porcupine going into our sugar bushes, kill them, process them, boil them in maple sap, and have this kind of like pulled porcupine in a jar, in a clay pot, cooked and ready to eat whenever we needed some protein and fat. And then you have the carbohydrates and all the micronutrients and minerals and vitamins and everything of the sap in there with it as well. And so that was our main food coming in another 3 weeks, just before the sugar bush. And then we would just go ham. We would just go ham on the sugar bush as hard as we could, bring in as much sap as we can and boil that all down and condense that all down into something that is stable. And it's absolutely critical to get that sap for the rest of the year. And you would have, I don't want to go too far into sugar bush because we only have like a few minutes left, but it's a really critical aspect of all of our food, and medicine comes from those trees at that time of year. So what I'm doing right now is getting all those things gathered up and prepared. I'm also finally ending my hunting season. The Western Canadian, like Western culture, Canadian hunting season for white-tailed deer, moose, elk, all those other cervids, and bear ended in January, at the beginning of January, at the end of December, beginning of January. There's no more white-tailed deer hunting, no more moose hunting, no more elk hunting. Anishinaabe big game hunting doesn't end until February. So that is the very end of our of our hunting season for big game, because now one of our teachings growing up was you go for those bucks and you go for those bulls, because we want to have as many females as we can out there so they can breed and they can replace the animals that we took. You could have one bull moose in 1,000 square acres and they'll be fine. The whole population can be fine because that bull can breed with all those females. If you have one female moose, one cow, and all the rest are bulls, you're not going to have more than 1 or 2 calves born. So that's how we have always been in our teachings. And we begin hunting the big game in September. And we hunt them all the way through the fall, all the way into the winter. And now we stop on what will be the full moon of February, which is in a few weeks. That's when we end that. We stop that. And there's kind of a semiology thing. Semiology is the reading of signs to understand other aspects. For sugar bush, when you see crows in the fields in flocks, that's when you know you have 1 week left to get ready for sugar bush. That is your final countdown, that you better be ready, because when those crows start coming back in large groups in the fields, like 10, 15 crows, or even 5 or 6 crows, then they're grouping up in the fields. That's because the temperature is right for them to start getting more active out on the land instead of hiding back in the trees or flying further south or into the cities. And that's really important. And another one, phenology. It's a part of semiology, phenology. The other one for us for hunting, I actually drew this earlier. That's a constellation that we see a lot this time of year. This is the Big Dipper, Ursa Major. And in now, in another few weeks, you're going to see this constellation start really moving through the sky. And traditionally speaking, these 4 stars that make up the cup, that's referred to as the bear. And those 3 stars that make up the handle, they represent 3 hunters chasing that bear. And so around the full moon of February is when we do what's called Waking of the Bear ceremony. And you'll see the star, the constellation, leave where Corona Borealis, the northern crown, is, the bear's den in our language, leaves that and starts running across the sky, trying to get away from those hunters. And as long as that bear is alive running across that sky, we don't hunt big game anymore. And as that constellation, that bear runs across the sky, eventually it dies and it's killed by those hunters. And when that bear dies, its blood pours down from the heavens and paints the maple trees and the sumac trees red with its blood. And we know now is when we begin to hunt. That is when we begin to go for food. And the reason we stop now, a lot of people think when they hear about native hunting rights and native hunting protocols and such, they think it's this kind of like esoteric, vague thing that just natives just hunt whenever they feel like it kind of thing. The teachings that I grew up with was the reason we do that is this time of year, what's another thing that happens with cervids in the wintertime, in late winter, early spring, February? Any idea, Chris?
If you're talking about the bucks, are we talking about the loss of antlers? Or if we're talking about the does, it's that they're
exactly.
young.
They're rearing young, exactly. The females are now officially and people say, well, they were pregnant back in January. They were also pregnant in November, to be frank. A lot of the does have already been bred by November. So if you shot a doe in December, there's a good chance she was pregnant anyways. But the idea is now they're getting ready to give birth, but also the males have dropped those things that are really easy to identify a male from. So now we don't risk it. We don't risk killing those animals, even though we may see what looks like male, like a buck or a bull's reproductive organs or other physical features. We know that those antlers are gone. We know that we stop hunting. So that constellation, when that bear starts to leave its den again and it's alive again, correlates to when those antlers drop to the ground. And so we stop hunting big game altogether. So those are a lot of different aspects that we're observing out on the landscape right now, and the ways that they correlate to our lives. I haven't hunted yet for big game this winter. I haven't had time to, sadly, but yeah, that's what we do.
I love how much stewardship is woven into there, because I know a lot of people on this call are interested in, they want to learn to hunt or they want to learn to forage. And, you can go and take a course and read a couple of books, but we often think of these as like seasonal things, okay, it's hunting season, so I'm going to get my stuff together and go out and hunt. Or it's like, it's springtime, the wild leeks are out. But what I love that's coming out when you're talking about this longer term perspective is if we're not really tracking these, not even across the seasons and the years, but across decades, then we're not really tapped into those longer term cycles. And how do we actually live in right relation with them to make sure that those foods are still there for future generations? So I just love how that's woven into some of these stories and these ancient teachings you're sharing with us there, Caleb.
For sure.
You know what?
There was a couple questions.
Yeah, there are a couple questions. I want to back up to one I have, and then I'll jump into one on there for a minute. Let's just touch on syrup because it is coming up right now. You actually said that we couldn't spend too much time there, and I don't want to spend a lot there, but syruping might be easier for some of you than you actually realize to get started in. You can maple syrup with a couple maple trees in your backyard. My wife and I, we tap about 20 trees on our property, but I know people that tap 2 trees, 3 trees, and they'll make a couple liters out of 2 or 3 trees. And really all you need to do, you can carve a spigot. What I've used before is actually sumac. I've taken a sumac, which is hollow, knocked out the pith and just carved a little tap and then taken my knife and cut a little insertion into a maple tree, a sugar maple, stuck it in there, and suddenly it's dripping out of the sumac sap. And then you make a little container or you put a bucket there to collect it into. And then all you need is a fire. So if you can have a fire in your backyard, or you could even do it on a propane burner, you could probably start making syrup. I know people that make maple syrup even in the city. I had a friend that was actually doing it renegade style behind a McDonald's for a couple of years. They go into the McDonald's parking lot, they tapped a couple maple trees, and then they were boiling it down right in their backyard in the city. So syrup might be a little easier as a next step for you than you may imagine. You got any tips there on just kind of a home do-it-yourself small scale syrup collection there that you want to, or setup you want to share?
So this is a piece of cedar that I just cut and split and then carved. This is what we call a slat, a cedar slat. And the way that we used to tap our maple trees was actual tapping. You would take a hatchet and you would drive it into the tree on a slight upwards angle and drive that in. And that's going to become a small little notch that you can tap and drive that into. And when that's set, the sap will start to run down the center. And to make more sap, you'll take your hatchet and tap on the left and the right with V lines going down to that, and you get more sap pouring in. And that sounds really violent. A lot of people are like, you're swinging an axe at a tree. That's going to destroy the tree. I can find my grandfather's taps from modern spiles in the maple trees that are dying at my camp that I cut down for firewood. I can find the old holes from 60 years ago in those trees still. Those holes never go away. They never fully heal. Whereas we actually cannot find any evidence of this on any tree in North America, the damage of this, because all you're doing is cutting into the xylem and phloem. That's as far as you go. And so we can't find, and we know one of the trees I had to cut down, my dad showed me, you can see on the bark's lines on the outside, that's where his grandfather, my great grandfather, hatchet tapped that maple tree. And the same tree, you can see the spile hole from my grandfather, but you couldn't see when we cut the tree up, you could not find, even though you could see the details in the bark, you could not see the damage to the wood. So that's how we traditionally tapped our trees. And then you would have your sap bucket waiting underneath that, and it would drip down into it. Somebody mentioned Robin Kimmerer. She's actually my aunt's sister. Robin and I would talk a lot about sugaring, and she's got a lot of her information she got actually from me and our friend Kevin Finney. We were both telling her a lot of stories about sap. We did. There's belief that when you when you put in large pans and let the ice kind of freeze, you can throw that ice out because it's going to have less sugar. I don't know if I believe that or not. I've got to actually I have to do a hydrology test, or hygrometry test, I think is what it's called, to actually check the sugar levels in that sap that's frozen and the sap that's not frozen. I'm not sure if it's true. What I do know, though, is that we did not hot rock boil, as many people like to say. We have never hot rock boiled sap for sugar. I don't care where you heard that. It has not ever happened. We proved it because we boiled 80 liters down to sugar with hot rocks only. And we were washing those rocks using the best stones that were perfectly smooth, and they were nice and smooth, and you could heat them up. And we were dusting the ash off them out of the fire when they were glowing red. We would dip them into a bucket of cold, clean water to get the ash off them. And we threw that stone into the bucket and boiled the sap. And we boiled it all down. It took us nearly a week, first of all. So that's not very efficient for just 80 liters of sap down to 1 or 2 liters of syrup. That's not a very efficient method. It takes you like a week and a half to do it. But more importantly, we then took a pH strip and tested the alkali content of that sap, of that syrup, and it was the equivalent of bleach. It was a 9. That'll kill you. That will kill you. And we did every single thing we possibly could to make that ash stay out of the syrup. We had some really crazy protocols of had lids made of bark on top of our baskets and our buckets. We did everything, dusting them as best we can, polishing the stones before they went in, all that kind of stuff. We still made enough ash concentration to make it toxic. The answer to how we used to boil before European contact was, we've had clay pots as long as Europeans have. We've had clay pottery for 5,500 years to 7,000 years. We were not in the Stone Age. All right. That rants off my chest.
Great. So two quick ones here. So someone here is asking, can you make maple syrup from Norway maple? I don't personally know about Norway. Maybe you do, Caleb. I would imagine yes. I've definitely done it with red maple, and I've done it with silver maple. You have to boil more, for longer. The sugar to water content is different. So it's a longer boil and less actual syrup per gallon collected with those other species. But I tap red and sugar maple and silver maple. Do you know about Norway specific, Caleb?
As long as it's a true maple, like Acer, you can tap it and get sugar.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
When I was out with my Dakota cousins and a bunch of Miami and Menominee friends and Meskwaki friends in Iowa, we tapped box elders because that's all they have for maple trees out there is box elder, and it's a maple tree. It's the ash leaf maple or Manitoba maple. It is a maple tree. It's Acer trifolia, I think. I think that's the name, or trilobia. I have to look it up again, but the box elder, you have to get 100 liters for 1 liter of syrup. It's a lot more watered down, but there's a lot of other trees you can tap. Birch, both yellow and white birch, like the paper birch, you can tap. Yellow birch has more volume than white birch does, if you ever are curious about that. Walnuts, the black walnut, you can actually get syrup from. And there's going to be something, if you tap and boil your walnut syrup or your walnut sap, you'll see these little brown globules forming inside the sap. You'll be like, oh, we got niter sand, throw that out. That's not niter sand. Pull those out, strain those out, and look at them. They're little tiny brown globules. That's 98% pectin. So collect that, process that. You now have pectin you can use for your canning and your jams and everything else and your jellies and whatnot. So it's a double bonus. You're getting the sugary walnut syrup. You can also tap hickory trees and a lot of other, there's a whole list of trees out there, deciduous trees that you can tap. It's not just the maples. So Norway maple, as long as it's true acer, like a true maple, I have no doubt in my mind that you can tap it. You may want to look in to see if there's a reason not to. There may be a toxic compound in Norway maple that I'm not aware of, but take a look into that.
Cool. We're going to make this the last question, Caleb, because we're over by almost 10 minutes here. And then I want to make sure that we give a chance for you just to share some of the stuff that you have coming up and opportunities for people to learn more from you. But this is a great one. I'm going back. Karen Barker asked this a little while back. She says, has climate change made any difference on how the signs and seasons correspond? And, this makes me think to an interview that I did with you years ago for this conference I was a part of up north. And you were in the interview, you were referencing how, some of these ancient stories that come out of your culture, that people that have been on this land for thousands and thousands of years, observing these cycles. And, they have things such as the crow moon. That's named that for a reason. It's based on this ancient cycle, and that you had shared with me that you're actually noticing that some of these time metrics out of some of your traditional stories and moons are not actually lining up anymore. And those could be indicators of a changing climate. So do you want to just share a little bit about that before we wrap it up here?
The number one is the crows. I said earlier, like offhand, that the crows are here a week before the syrup run, so the sap runs. I'm noticing hiccups. I'm not necessarily going to say that they don't show up before the sap runs, but I'm noticing hiccups. Like in January, the crows were still in the fields. So do I start tapping in January for the maple trees? Like, do I do that? Do I do an early run on my trees and then wait again? And then we'll see the crows, like almost like they're confused, leave the fields for like 3 weeks and then come back to the fields and then leave again for another week. And then suddenly they show up again, and we're not sure, like, do we start now? Start now. How now? No, now. It gets into this really confusing, when do we begin? Because the sap may start in January, but that's not the sap you want to necessarily be harvesting. And you can actually stress the trees out, and the trees themselves are getting stressed by that. It's really rare to have, you've probably heard the poplar tree pop. When a temperature gets to a certain point in the wintertime, poplar trees start exploding, and a lot of other hardwoods start exploding because their sap ran up, and then it got warm, and then it froze and expanded and broke the tree. Maple trees are popping a lot more often nowadays that I've been noticing. So it's really frustrating, and it's really disconcerting to notice all these things happening rapidly in our sugar bush, because the more of those maple trees die, the less sap I'm going to be able to gather with my kids, my grandkids, my nephews and nieces, and less that they're going to be able to harvest later on. We're still going to have maples. They're a pretty resilient hardwood species, but we're going to have less of them available because they're getting harmed and damaged. So I don't tap my trees no matter how much I see change in the winter. I wait until I see the crows at the end of February. That's when I really pay attention and try to stick to the traditions. It's not always going to work. And same thing, like the black flies come out, and sometimes the flowers aren't blooming yet. And sometimes the black flies come out and the trout aren't biting yet. And sometimes the trout are biting and the black flies haven't come out yet. And it becomes this weird little game of like trying to figure out, is this climate change? Is this La Nina? Is this El Nino? What are these? What are these? It's not frost split. I guess you could call it frost split, but it's the actual ice itself, the sap itself, the liquid form. It doesn't just the condensation frost over. It's not like hoarfrost and all that kind of stuff. It's genuine ice. The trees become icicles if they have enough sap inside of them and freeze. And it's really disconcerting to see it in the maple trees these days.
Yeah, we could probably go on for a long time. I mean, as a naturalist and as a tracker, I can list dozens of things that I'm noticing changing in our local ecosystem. And for me, that's part of what kind of makes, the shifting climate a real thing. And as I say climate change, I just want to acknowledge, like, the climate's always been changing. It's been in a constant state of change since the beginning of time. So I do want to acknowledge that when I say it. But what we're seeing is kind of
Sure.
an acceleration in change and some major shifts to habitat. And from my experience, a lot of people think of climate change as the thing that's happening up in the Arctic and the polar bears. And, when you chat about them, they're like, oh, well, I don't know. The seasons seem pretty close. Maybe it's a bit warmer. But I can tell you, once you learn to track and you become a naturalist, you're going to see so many signs of this that most people are just oblivious to because they're just not trained to look at nature through this kind of lens and that level of observation and understanding of what's normal and not. So, let's kind of close her down here, Caleb. So thanks so much to everyone that's joined us here tonight. There's a lot of people that are wondering how to learn more about what you're doing. The one that I'm just going to pitch, because we're partnering on this one together, Caleb and I ran a beta version of a class that we called The Hunter's Journey this past fall. And it's really for people that are either think that they would like to hunt, but they want to make sure that they're doing it in a respectful way with stewardship in mind. And they don't necessarily have a mentor, or people that are just like, I'm not even sure if this is my thing, but it just feels like something I should understand better. So we created this course called The Hunter's Journey, and we're looking to run another cohort of it if there's enough interest. So if you go to www.thehuntersjourney.com, you can actually get on a waiting list there and let us know if you're interested in exploring hunting from this perspective of stewardship and respect and being able to feed your family in a good way from the land. I know I was definitely not exposed to hunting in a healthy way, and it wasn't until later in life that I realized you could actually hunt as a steward and in right relation with the land. So I'll share that one. Caleb and I are going to be teaching that together. Where else can people learn about you, Caleb? What else do you have going on?
Before I do that, I just want to mention one thing that might help you. That might help you with what we're doing. When we're talking about tonight. There's a great book from my area called Nature's Year in the Kawarthas by Drew Monkman. Phenomenal book. Great book that brings up like this exact time of week, like this week of this year of this month. This is what you'll see the animals doing. This animal is doing this. The trees are doing this. All nature happening over an entire year cycle. It's a book by Drew Monkman called Nature's Year in the Kawarthas. Kawarthas. The Kawarthas, as in the Kawartha Lakes. With that said, the best way to learn this is nature's forgotten language. If you can't get out there on your own and learn this stuff by yourself, get some assistance, get some mentoring, such as Nature's Forgotten Language, which is Chris's course that he's running. It's an amazing course. I got to take a look at the curriculum. This is top-notch stuff, folks. Beyond that, for me, if you want to know more about what I'm getting up to, check out the Canadian Bushcraft podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Breaker, Podbean, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict. If it's a podcast platform, look us up. We're probably on it. And we have episodes drop every Sunday afternoon. We've been doing them since the beginning of the pandemic, and we're going to continue them past the pandemic. And when everything's back to a beautiful, healthy lifestyle once more, and we finally got back into a good balance of some form, and maybe finally get into a good balance in some form, we're going to continue to be doing the podcast every Sunday afternoon, everywhere you can. Beyond that, I do what's called Firekeeping Fridays every Friday afternoon around 2 or 3 o'clock on the Facebook page for the Indigenous Student Services at Fleming College page. So it's a long name, Indigenous Student Services at Fleming College page. And it's free. Everybody can tune in. This past week, we did one all about learning how to sharpen all your tools. This coming Friday, we're going to be doing one all about traditional flint and steel fire lighting, learning how to actually make sparks and make those sparks turn into flames. We're also be talking about a lot more about the 4-day fires, like what I have to go back and take care of after this session. All those kinds of things. And I also work with the Nagajwanong, and that's a hard one to spell, Nogajwaning Friendship Center here in Peterborough. I've been working with the Nagajwanong Friendship Center since 2016, I believe, with programming. And one of the things that we're doing is bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks, we do sessions. And the next one is coming up next Wednesday, not this Wednesday, not in 2 days, but in a week and in 9 days. We're going to be doing an episode, a session on Zoom, just like this, where I'm going to be explaining how to make rope from the landscape. So we're going to be talking about rope from bark, rope from roots, rope from plants, rope from animals, like animal hair, animal hide, all that kind of stuff, and learning how to do different kinds of fiber and all what they do. register with the Ngajwanong Friendship Center to get in on that. And it's, again, a free session. These are completely free. You don't have to pay a single penny to join in on them. And of course, what I usually do is we teach this stuff in person at Canadian Bushcraft. Sadly, we are not right now because of dropping things off of our chairs, apparently, but also because of the obvious reasons that we've been dealing with over the last 10 to 11 months now. But when we're finally safe enough to start going back into public and doing in-person classes, check out Canadian Bushcraft. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere else. We don't have a website currently right now, but we'll have one back up and running hopefully by the end of this year. And we do a lot of stuff in different ways. We teach everything from one-day workshops on how to make birch bark baskets and how to take care of, how to even process black ash trees into these beautiful woven baskets, all the way to week-long expedition survival courses where we teach everything from navigation with just the landscape and no map and compass, all the way to how to light a fire by rubbing sticks together, all the way to building watercrafts and long-term shelters on the landscape. So we teach a whole lot of stuff. We wear many hats. Check us out. Basically, just type in Canadian Bushcraft anywhere and you'll find us.
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you on here tonight, Caleb. I'm going to just throw out one little thing there. If you want to support Caleb's great work, he's always sharing stuff for free. And I'm so appreciative of that. He's just teaching nonstop. And he does have a Patreon page where you can make a small monthly contribution that really goes a long way in helping him out. So patreon.com/Canadian Bushcraft. And there's some nice perks there. So if you want to just support him teaching children, preserving this knowledge, then consider supporting Caleb and Canadian Bushcraft on Patreon. Other than that, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Next week, we have Lee Earl on, and we're going to dive deep into wildlife tracking again, as well as winter foraging and plant identification with Lee Earl next week. So come join us, help us spread the word. And thanks so much for a wonderful night, everyone. This is truly a pleasure to spend this time with all of you. And you as well, Caleb. So nice to connect as always, brother. Good night, everybody.